My name is on the reconciliation sheet for October 22nd. That alone should not mean anything. My name is on every reconciliation sheet that has come out of the Caribert primary elevator since the fall of 2011. 14 harvests, thousands of trucks, millions of kilograms of grain. Every working day, when the last truck leaves the yard and the bins have stopped taking weight, I print the day's totals, check them by hand, sign the bottom right corner, and put the sheet in the envelope for Saskatoon. That is what a weighmaster does. That is what I do. But the reconciliation sheet for the 22nd of October, last Tuesday, has my signature on it in my handwriting, and I did not sign it. I want to be careful about that sentence, because it is the sentence everything else depends on. I am not saying someone forged my name. I am not saying someone copied my signature well enough to fool a busy assistant manager at the end of a harvest rush. I am saying, I have looked at that signature for 6 days. I have held it under the desk lamp. I have compared it to sheets from last year and the year before. I have traced the loops with my finger. The K is mine. The way the V leans is mine. The way I cross the T in Kovacs is mine. The small downward stroke after my middle initial is mine. The one my father taught me to put there when I was a girl because, according to him, a signature should end with intention. The sheet was countersigned by Darrell Petruck at 1842. I clocked out at 1839. There are 3 minutes between those two times. 3 minutes in which I am the person who signed the sheet, and also the person who was already in her truck on the access road. I have the dash camera footage from my truck. I have the gate log. I have the till receipt from the Esso in Wilkie at 1851, which is exactly the time it takes to drive from our gate to that pump if you leave the elevator at 1839 and not a second later. I know this because I have made that drive hundreds of times. The sheet exists. My signature exists on it. I exist outside the building when it must have been signed. Both are real. The 3 minutes are not. I have been the weighmaster at the Caribert primary elevator for 14 harvests. Before me it was Hugh Lavoie, who trained me in September of 2011 and died 3 years later of an aneurysm in his garden in Unity. Before Hugh, there was a man named Dorkson. I have never been able to remember Dorkson's first name, though I have signed Christmas cards for his widow every year because she still lives in Caribert, still comes to the rink, and still puts too much sugar in her tea at community suppers. The job, on paper, is simple. Trucks arrive loaded with grain. Canola mostly in October, wheat and durum earlier, lentils and peas in their seasons. The truck rolls onto the inbound scale, and I take a gross weight. The truck dumps into the pit. The empty truck rolls back across the outbound scale, and I take a tare weight. The difference is the net. The net is recorded against a contract number. The contract number tells us who owns the grain, which bin it gets routed into, and which grain company account it belongs to. At the end of the day, I total every net for every contract and produce a reconciliation sheet that goes to the company in Saskatoon, to the elevator manager, and into a folder in my desk. That is the work. I am very good at it. I make almost no errors. The job is monotonous in the way careful jobs are monotonous, which is to say that the monotony is not the enemy of the work. The monotony is the protection. Doing the same thing the same way, load after load, day after day, is what makes the wrong thing stand out when it arrives. That is what I believed. Now I am not sure the wrong thing ever stood out. It may be that the wrong thing has been part of the procedure from the beginning, and I only noticed it when it finally left a number too large to ignore. It is important for what comes after that I describe the scale house, because the scale house is where everything happened, and the scale house is small enough that nothing should be able to happen inside it without me knowing. The scale house is a single-story concrete building set against the south leg of the elevator. There is a sliding window facing the inbound scale. and a second sliding window facing the outbound scale. There is a steel door facing the yard. The wind finds every seam in that door in October, and the dust finds the rest. Inside, there is my desk. It is a metal industrial desk with a green linoleum top that was scratched before I was born. On that desk is the weight terminal, a brown box with a red LED display about the size of a paperback book. The terminal has the green button I press to take the weight. Beside it is the printer, which prints scale tickets in triplicate on perforated paper: white top copy, yellow second copy, pink third copy. There is the contract board, a sheet of plywood covered in cork, where the day's open contract numbers are pinned on small white index cards. There is a spike for the second copies. There are contract envelopes for the third copies. There are wax pencils in the drawer for bin assignments. There is a paper ledger, because Hugh taught me never to trust a machine without making my hand agree with it. Behind the desk, on a folding table, there is a coffee maker stained brown around the warming plate. On the wall, there is a co-op calendar that is 2 years out of date because the picture for September of that year is a combine at sunset on the Kovacs section, and I like looking at it. There is also a wall clock. The wall clock is set to the terminal. The terminal time is the time that goes on the ticket, and the ticket time is the legally binding time. When a truck weighs in, the terminal time says when. When it weighs out, the terminal time says when. If there is ever a dispute about delivery, moisture, grade, or demurrage, the ticket time is the time everyone accepts. Every morning, before the first truck, I check the wall clock against the terminal. For 14 years, they have agreed to the second. Except last Tuesday. I will come to that. I need to describe the procedure, because the procedure is what I want you to understand. It is also what I thought would save me, if anything could. When a truck pulls onto the inbound scale, the driver hands a ticket up through my window. The ticket has the farmer's name, the contract number, the grade declaration, the field number, and the truck's license plate. I check the plate against what I can see through the window. I check the contract number against the cards on the board. I press the green button on the terminal. The gross weight prints onto the ticket. I tell the driver which pit to dump in. The driver dumps. The truck rolls back onto the outbound scale. I press the green button again. The tare prints. The terminal calculates the net and prints it under the tare. I tear off the white copy and hand it down to the driver. I keep the yellow copy on my spike. The pink copy goes into the contract envelope on the board. That is one load. On a normal day, I process between 40 and 50 loads. On a harvest rush day, I have done as many as 80. Last Tuesday was a rush day. Last Tuesday, I processed 73 loads. The reconciliation sheet that I did not sign says I processed 74. The 74th load on the sheet is recorded against contract number 8841C. I have been entering loads against 8841C since 2011. It belongs, according to the wooden card index in my bottom drawer, to a farmer named Eldon Friesen. Eldon Friesen does not exist. I want to slow down there because that is the part of the story where my mind still tries to turn away. When Hugh trained me in 2011, he walked me through the contract board on my first morning. He showed me how to pin the cards, how to color code bin assignments with the wax pencils, how to handle a split load where a single truck is carrying grain from 2 different fields under 2 different contracts. He showed me how to read the terminal if the LED segments were dim in winter. He showed me how to clean dust out of the printer without tearing the perforations. He showed me where the manager kept the spare binders and where the company forms from Saskatoon were filed. Hugh was thorough. He was the kind of man who taught a procedure by doing it slowly 3 times, then watching you do it badly once, then having you do it again until your hands knew it. At the end of that first morning, after he had shown me everything else, he opened the bottom drawer of the green desk and lifted out a small wooden card index. It was the kind of card box a librarian might have used, dark wood, brass corners, smooth from years of hands. Inside were a dozen cards with farmer names, contract numbers, and small notations in pencil. Hugh told me these were standing contracts. He said the elevator had a number of long-running accounts that did not need to be reopened every harvest. On certain days, he said, the manager might ask me to allocate a load against one of those standing numbers. If that happened, I should pull the card, mark the date and tonnage on the back, and refile it. He said it was old-fashioned, but the company liked the paper trail. Then he showed me 8841C, Eldon Friesen. Hugh said Eldon farmed a quarter section out by the Tramping Lake Road. He said Eldon was old. He said Eldon's loads would come in on rare days when we had run out of bin space against the year's commercial contracts and needed a place to put a few hundred bushels that would otherwise spoil in someone's auger. He said Eldon understood the arrangement. He said Eldon did not drive anymore. The tickets would be hand-delivered by a man in a half-ton. He said the loads against 8841C never came on slow days. They came when the yard was lined up to the road and we were turning trucks. Then Hugh tapped the card with his fingernail and said, "You'll know the kind of day. I have, since 2011, allocated 31 loads against 8841C. I know the count exactly. After last Tuesday, I went through every year's folder in my desk and counted them. The earliest is October 4th, 2011. The most recent is October 22 of this year, the one that is not supposed to exist. The loads have always come on busy days. The vehicle has always been a brown Ford half-ton with a Saskatchewan plate I have never fully read, because the plate is always partly hidden by mud or by a tarp strap hanging at the wrong angle. The driver has always handed the ticket up through my window without speaking. The driver has always gone on to the pit without waiting for me to acknowledge him. I have never seen his face. I wrote that sentence for the first time on Wednesday morning, and when I wrote it, I had to put the pencil down. 14 years, 31 loads, a driver close enough to pass me a ticket through a sliding window, a driver who must have turned his head toward me, a driver whose arm must have entered the scale house far enough that I could have seen his sleeve, his wrist, his hand, maybe his wedding ring if he had one. And I cannot describe his face, not vaguely, not poorly, not at all. There is not a blurred face in my memory. There is no hat brim, no beard, no sunglasses, no shadowed profile. There is simply the hand, the ticket, the contract number, and the work continuing. I called the Tramping Lake Municipal Office on Wednesday morning, the day after the sheet. A woman named Carla Whitford answered. I went to school with Carla. She has worked in that office for 20 years and has the kind of voice people use when they are looking over paper while still trying to sound friendly. I asked her to confirm that Eldon Friesen still owned the quarter section on Township Road 354. There was a pause. Then she asked me to spell the name. I did. There was typing, paper, a drawer, more typing. She told me she could not find a landowner by that name in any of the 3 rural municipalities her office covered. She said she had been processing land title transfers for that region since 2004, and she would know. She asked kindly if I might be thinking of Elwyn Friesen, who farmed by Landis and died in the 90s. I said I might be. I thanked her and hung up. The card for 8841C is still in the wooden index in my desk drawer. The back of the card has 31 penciled entries. The first 18 are in Hugh's handwriting. The next 12 are mine. The 31st is also mine, dated last Tuesday. I do not remember writing it. Now I have to walk through last Tuesday in order, because the order matters. The rush had started Monday. The combines had been going since Saturday, and the canola was coming off dry. Anyone who has worked around grain knows what that means. It means everyone moves at once. It means drivers show up before sunrise, with coffee in thermoses and sleep in their eyes. It means engines idling at the gate. It means calls from producers asking how long the queue is. It means the pit never stays empty long enough for the dust to settle. Daryl Petruk told me Monday evening that we already had trucks forming at the gate. Daryl is the assistant manager. He is in his early 40s, a stocky man from Wilkie. Even-tempered, practical. The sort of person who can be standing in sleet with a radio in one hand and a clipboard in the other, and still sound as if he has plenty of time. He has worked at the elevator for 11 years. He is the second most senior person in the building after the manager. And the manager was in Saskatoon that day for a regional meeting. I opened at 5:30 Tuesday morning, half an hour earlier than usual. When I arrived, there were 9 trucks already in the yard, with their engines running. The sky was still black. The lights on the elevator legs were on. The air smelled of diesel and crushed canola hull, which is sweet and oily and slightly nutty in a way that belongs only to October. The temperature was -3. The gravel had a frost crust that cracked under my boots. I unlocked the scale house. I started the coffee maker. I switched on the terminal. The red LED numbers glowed awake. I checked the terminal against the wall clock. 0530, 0530. They agreed. I pulled the cards for the day's expected loads. There were 41 cards on the board at 5:30. Before I counted them, I had the feeling the board had 1 card too many. It was not a thought. It was not a suspicion. It was a sensation. The way you know a familiar room has changed before you know what object moved. I counted. 41. I counted again. 41. No extra card. No wrong contract. No unfamiliar name. The feeling stayed. The first truck rolled onto the inbound scale at 0542. The driver was Curtis Heinrichs, a man I have known since I was 12, hauling for Bergen Farms against contract 6612-A. He handed up the ticket with 2 fingers and said, "Morning, Elise, though I had not told you my name until now. My name is Elise Kovacs. I suppose that belongs in the record somewhere." Curtis's truck weighed in clean. He dumped, he weighed out. The terminal time and the wall clock agreed at 0551. I handed him his white copy and made a small mark on the back of the Bergen contract card. The pencil mark is not required. I make it for myself. I have made those marks every working day for 14 years. The next 11 hours were a rush. I am not going to recount every load. I could. If you put the ledger in front of me, I could walk through the names, the contracts, the gross weights, the tears, and the loads where the drivers joked or complained or forgot their field numbers. I could tell you which driver had a cracked passenger mirror and which one left a coffee cup on the scale rail. I remember details like that because that is what careful work does to the mind. But I will recount the loads where something happened. At 0914, the brown Ford half-ton came through the gate. I want to describe the moment I saw it because I want to be honest about what I felt. I did not feel surprised. I did not feel curious. I did not look at the license plate, which is something I do for every other truck. I felt a small interior settling, the way you feel when you sit down in a chair that is exactly the height you expected. The Ford rolled onto the inbound scale. I slid the window open. A hand passed up a ticket. I took it. The ticket was for contract 8841C. The farmer's name was Eldon Friesen. The grade declaration was canola. The field number was filled in. The license plate box had numbers in it I cannot now picture, though I know I looked at that space on the form. I know, because I always look. It is part of the procedure. But in my memory, the space is not blank and not filled. It is simply not available to me. The handwriting on the ticket was a hand I now realize I cannot describe. I cannot picture the handwriting, even though I held the ticket in my fingers, even though the pink copy is still in my drawer, even though I have looked at it since. The handwriting is mine. I do not have a memory of writing it. I have a memory of receiving it. I pressed the green button. The terminal showed 41,820 kilograms. I told the driver to dump in pit 3. He drove forward without answering. I waited. The truck rolled back onto the outbound scale. I pressed the green button again. The terminal showed 17,840 kilograms. The net was 23,980 kilograms. That is an impossible load for a half-ton. Not merely unlikely, not overloaded, not unsafe. Impossible. A brown Ford half-ton with a small grain hopper in the bed cannot carry nearly 24 tons of canola. It cannot carry half that. It could not carry a quarter of that without collapsing on its axles and splitting the frame. I know this. I knew it last Tuesday. But in the scale house, with the red digits showing 23,980 and the truck idling on the outbound scale, I felt nothing. I tore off the white copy and handed it down. The driver drove on. I pinned the pink copy to the board. I opened the wooden card index, pulled 8841C, made a small pencil mark on the back, wrote the tonnage, refiled the card, poured myself a second cup of coffee, and waited for the next truck. The next truck rolled onto the inbound scale at 0919. I do not have any explanation for the 4 minutes that passed between the Ford leaving and the next truck arriving. The yard had been full all morning. There had been no gaps. Darrell later pulled the gate log, and the gate log shows a truck rolling through at 0915, immediately behind the brown Ford. That truck should have been on my inbound scale by 0916 at the latest. The terminal shows the next gross at 0919. 3 minutes are unaccounted for. I am noting them here for the same reason I noted the 3 minutes at the end of the day. They feel like the same 3 minutes. I do not want to give the impression that I knew, while the day was happening, that the day was wrong. I did not. I worked the day. I did the loads. I drank coffee. I answered the phone. I ate a peanut butter sandwich at noon that I had made at 5 that morning and cut in half. I changed the cards on the board as contracts closed out. I pinned new cards when Darrell came in around 11 with paperwork from a producer near Looseland who had added a late delivery. I checked the plates. I took the weights. I watched the terminal. I made my pencil marks. The wall clock and the terminal agreed all day, except for one moment. At 13:47, they disagreed for the first time in 14 years. I was about to print a ticket for a load from Schoenfeld Farms. A young driver I did not know had pulled onto the inbound scale. He was looking at his phone while the truck idled. I checked the ticket, checked the contract card, and put my finger on the green button. Then I glanced at the terminal, 13:43. I glanced at the wall clock, 13:47. The difference was 4 minutes. I sat there for a moment with my finger above the button. I did not press it. I looked back at the terminal, 13:43. I looked back at the wall, 13:48. The difference was now 5 minutes. Neither clock had moved between my glances. That is what I mean when I say I cannot explain it. I did not watch one clock tick forward and the other stay still. I did not lose a minute. The wall clock had not moved in the manner a clock moves. The terminal had not moved in the manner a terminal moves. The difference simply widened. The driver looked up through his side window and asked, "Your clock off?" I told him the terminal was official. He shrugged. I pressed the green button. The gross printed at 13:43. He drove forward to the pit. When I looked again, the wall clock said 13:43. The terminal said 13:43. They have agreed every time I have looked at them since. At 16:22, the brown Ford came through a second time. This is not what was supposed to happen. The 8841C contract has never received 2 loads in one day in the entire 14 years I have been at the elevator. I want to be specific about that. I went back through the folders. I went through Hugh's entries and mine. Across 31 loads and more than a decade of harvest, there is exactly 1 entry per day. 1 load per visit. The brown Ford has never come twice. At 16:22, it came twice. Again, I felt that same settling inside me. Again, I did not look at the plate. Again, the hand came up with the ticket. Again, the ticket was in my handwriting. I weighed the gross. 41,820 kilograms. The exact same number as the first load. I told him to dump in pit 3. He dumped. He rolled back onto the outbound scale. I weighed the tare. 17,840 kilograms. The same tare. The net was 23,980 kilograms. The same net. I tore off the white copy. I handed it down. The driver drove on. I pinned the pink copy. I made a pencil mark. I went back to work. I am going to tell you what I noticed only after the fact. The pink copy I pinned for the second load was the same physical piece of paper as the pink copy for the first load. The triplicate paper is tinted. White, yellow, pink. The pink copies tear differently depending on where the perforation catches. If the paper has sat in the printer too long, there are tiny bends near the edge. If there is dust in the feed, it leaves a faint gray smear on the bottom margin. There are 2 pink slips for 8841C in my desk drawer now. One is stamped 0914. One is stamped 1622. They are the same slip. I have held them up to the light. I have laid them one over the other. The perforations match exactly. The slight tear on the lower left edge matches. The dust smear matches. The small pencil mark I made on the back of one is present on the back of the other. The slip has 2 timestamps because the slip has been weighed twice. I do not know how to make that sentence sound like it belongs in a normal report. I am leaving it as it is. At 17:30, the rush began to taper. I had 8 more trucks queued. I worked through them. The last truck rolled off the outbound scale at 1811. I closed the inbound window and let the yard noise settle into the walls. Anyone who has worked a harvest rush knows that the end of the day is not silence. It is the echo of engines still in your ears. It is grain dust in your nose. It is the terminal hum. It is the printer warm under your hand. It is your own mind continuing to count because it does not yet know the work has stopped. I started the reconciliation. The terminal does most of the math. I check the math by hand on the paper ledger because Hugh taught me to check the math by hand. I went down the contracts one by one. I tallied the loads. I counted the slips on the spike. I counted the marks across the backs of the cards. 73 slips. 73 loads on the terminal. 73 loads in the ledger. The 8841C card had 2 marks for October 22nd, in my handwriting, in 2 slightly different pressures of pencil. I printed the reconciliation sheet. The sheet said 74. I stood at the printer with the paper in my hand. The terminal screen behind me still said 73. The ledger on the desk said 73. The spike had 73 yellow slips. The reconciliation sheet said 74. The discrepancy was on the line for 8841C. The sheet said, Contract 8841C had received 3 loads, totaling 71,940 kilograms. The card said 2. The spike said 2. My memory said 2. The sheet, freshly printed, said 3. I want to describe what I did, because what I did is what frightens me most. I did not call Daryl. I did not call the manager. I did not stop the reconciliation. I did not photograph the discrepancy. I did not reprint the sheet. I did not say aloud, "This is wrong." I sat down at the desk. I picked up my pen, the black Bic I keep clipped to the cover of the ledger. I signed the reconciliation sheet on the lower right line where it says, Weighmaster. I dated it October 22nd. I put my middle initial. I put the small downstroke after it. I placed the sheet in the manila envelope. I put the envelope in the out tray on the corner of the desk. I capped the pen. I clipped it back to the ledger. I closed the ledger. I switched off the terminal. I switched off the lights. I locked the scale house. I walked out to my truck. The wall clock said 1839 when I closed the door. The terminal had said 1839 when I switched it off. The reconciliation sheet was found by Daryl at 1842 when he came back into the office to lock the safe. He told me this Wednesday morning when I came in early and asked to see the copy. He said he had countersigned it at 1842, as required by company procedure on rush days, and put it in the courier bag for Saskatoon. He said the sheet looked normal. I asked him if he had noticed any irregularity. He said no. I asked whether he had looked at the contract-by-contract breakdown. He said he had no reason to. The bottom line aggregate had matched the bin level readings from the leg sensors, and at the assistant manager level, that is the number that matters. I asked him what the aggregate was. He told me. I looked at the sheet. He was right. The bottom line aggregate was correct. It was correct, however, for 74 loads, not 73. I am going to write the next part as plainly as I can. The aggregate tonnage on the reconciliation sheet for October 22 was 1,847,260 kilograms. That is the total weight of canola the elevator received that day. The leg sensor readings from the bins, which are taken independently by a separate sensor system and which Daryl uses to spot check the reconciliation, also showed 1,847,260 kilograms. The two numbers agreed. They could only have agreed if 74 loads had been received. The bin sensors do not know about contract numbers. They do not know about tickets. They do not know about Eldon Friesen, or Hugh, or me, or the brown Ford. The bin sensors only know what weight of grain has physically fallen into the bins. According to the bin sensors, 1,847,260 kilograms of canola fell into the bins of the Caribert primary elevator on October 22nd. According to my spike, my ledger, and my memory, 73 loads totaling 1,823,280 kilograms fell into the bins. The difference is 23,980 kilograms. One load against contract 8841C. Exactly. The grain is in the bins. The grain is physically in the bins. That is what I need you to understand. This is not only a paperwork error. It is not only a ghost ticket or a false signature. The bins are 23,980 kilograms heavier than my ledger says they should be. They were that heavy at 1811, when the last legitimate truck rolled off the scale. They were that heavy when Daryl checked them. They have been that heavy every time anyone has checked them since. The canola is there. I cannot account for where it came from. I went home Tuesday night and did not sleep well. That is not unusual after a rush day. Sometimes, after 12 hours of engines and numbers, my mind keeps printing weights in the dark. I will close my eyes and see red LED digits. I will dream of tickets feeding crooked through the printer. But that night was different. I did not dream about the loads I had processed. I dreamed about an empty scale. The red digits on the terminal read 23,980. No truck, no driver, no grain. Just the number. I came back Wednesday at 5:30 and went straight to my desk. I looked at the spike. I looked at the cards. I looked at the out tray, though the sheet was already gone because Daryl had sent it to Saskatoon. Then I opened the wooden card index. I need to say this correctly. I did not decide to open the wooden card index. I came into the scale house. I took one glove off. I set my coffee down. Then my hand went to the bottom drawer. The drawer sticks. It always has. You have to pull once, then lift a little, then pull again. It makes a specific wooden scrape against the runner. I had opened it before I registered that I was opening it. The 8841C card was in my hand before I registered that I had pulled it. There were 3 entries for October 22nd. The third entry was in my handwriting, 23,980 kilograms. I had counted 2 entries Tuesday evening. There were now 3. The pencil pressure on the third entry was the same as the second. I am going to say that again because it matters. The second entry was made at 1622. The third entry was made in the same pressure, with the same angle, with the same dullness of pencil point, as if my hand had done both in the same sitting. The third entry must have been made between 1811 when I closed the inbound window, and 1839 when I left the building. I have no memory of making it. I had not opened the drawer between 1811 and 1839. I am sure of this because of the sound the drawer makes. That sound is part of the room. I would have heard it. I want to be precise about my emotional state on Wednesday morning. I was not panicking. I had not panicked on Tuesday. I have not panicked since. What I have been doing is sitting with a feeling that I now recognize as familiar. It is the feeling I had when the brown Ford came through at 0914. It is the feeling I had at 1622 when it came through again. It is the feeling I had when I signed the sheet. It is the feeling of arriving in the kitchen for a reason you have forgotten and trusting that the original decision was sound. That is the closest I can come. You walk into the kitchen and stop. You do not remember whether you came for a glass or scissors or the phone charger or to turn off the stove, but your body knows you had a reason. You stand there, waiting for the reason to return. That feeling has been present at every load against 8841C. I understand that now. I did not think of it as a feeling before. I thought of it as part of the work. But it has been there, low and steady, for 14 harvests. The feeling of being on schedule for something I cannot name. I am writing this account because I have realized I do not know what I am on schedule for, and I would like to know before I sign the next sheet. On Wednesday afternoon, I went to look for Eldon Friesen's quarter section. I drove out the Tramping Lake Road with the RM map open on my passenger seat. I had a vague sense of where the farm should be, the kind of sense you have for a place you know without ever having visited it. Second approach past the Lutheran Cemetery, north side. Shelter belt of Caraganas along the road. A house set back from the ditch, probably white, though I do not know why I thought that. A low shed, maybe a rusted auger, maybe bins with paint peeling from the roofs. I drove past the Lutheran Cemetery. There was no second approach on the north side. There was no shelter belt. There was no house. There was a long, unbroken stretch of stubble field belonging, according to the map, to a Hutterite colony out of Hodgeville. I kept driving. I drove the road to its end at the lake. Then I turned around and drove back. I did this in daylight. I did this with my window down. There is no farm, but there is, on the Tramping Lake Road, at the second approach past the Lutheran Cemetery, on the north side, a brown Ford half-ton parked on the verge. No plates, no driver visible, mud on the tailgate, a tarp strap hanging from the rear. I saw it on the way out. I saw it on the way back. I did not stop. I am writing that plainly because I need it to remain plain. I did not stop. I have not stopped at it on either of the 2 times I have driven that road since. The half-ton has been in the same position each time, same angle to the ditch, same front wheel turned slightly toward the road, same tarp strap, same brown paint faded along the bed. I cannot say for certain it is the same half-ton that has handed me 31 tickets, because I have never seen the half-ton at the elevator from outside the scale house. I have never seen that driver's door open. I have never watched anyone climb down from it. I have never walked around the back to look at the plate. What I can say is that when I see it, I have no impulse to approach. The impulse I have is to keep driving. That impulse is not fear. It is the same settled, kitchen-bound, on-schedule impulse. The impulse to continue the work. On Thursday, I called Carla Whitford again and asked the question I had not asked Wednesday. I asked whether there had ever been an Eldon Friesen in the RM records. She put me on hold. I could hear the office radio faintly through the line. Weather, a commercial for tires, someone in the background laughing at something. When Carla came back 11 minutes later, her voice had changed. She told me there had been an Eldon Friesen in the RM of Tramping Lake. He owned a quarter section on Township Road 354 between 1948 and 1971. In 1971, he sold the quarter to a neighbor, retired into Wilkie, and died in 1974. There had been no freezing on that road since. Carla asked me, because she is a kind person, whether I was all right. I told her I was. Before she hung up, she added that the Caribert elevator had been built in 1949. Her grandfather had hauled grain to it in the early years. She said he used to talk about the old weighmaster, a man named Dorkson. She offered this as a small piece of local history. I thanked her and hung up. Eldon Friesen owned land when the elevator was new. Dorkson was the weighmaster when the elevator was new. Eldon Friesen died in 1974. Dorkson trained Hugh. Hugh trained me. And I have been entering grain against Eldon Friesen's standing contract for 14 years. On Thursday afternoon, when the manager was back from Saskatoon, I went into his office. He was sitting at his desk, eating soup from the gas station, the kind with a plastic spoon that bends when you try to scoop potatoes. He looked tired. Everyone looks tired in harvest. His phone was face down beside the bowl. There were 3 binders open in front of him. I asked him whether the company had a standing reconciliation target for our elevator. He said, without looking up, that of course we had targets. Every primary elevator had targets. He reviewed them every Monday. We were 3% ahead, which was excellent. I asked whether those targets were reflected on the daily reconciliation sheets. He said no. The daily sheets were inputs to the target. The target was managed in Saskatoon. I asked whether the sheets ever came back from Saskatoon. He said they were filed and did not ordinarily come back. I asked whether the bottom line aggregate was the figure that mattered. He said yes. Then I asked whether, in his time here, the aggregate had ever failed to match the bin sensor figure at the end of the day. He looked up from the soup. He thought for a moment. Then he said, no. I waited. He said, not once in 23 years. Then he smiled, not because anything was funny, but because people smile at reliable machinery. That's a good system, that one, he said. I left his office with a clear understanding of what I had not wanted to understand. The aggregate tonnage at the end of each working day is a number the bins arrive at independently of my count. The bins fill. The sensors register the fill. The sensors produce a number. The number is the number. My job, as I understood it for 14 years, was to allocate the incoming grain across contracts in a way that, when summed, reproduced the bin number. I now believe my job has been the reverse. I believe the bins have been filling to a number determined elsewhere. I believe my contract allocations have been the backfitting of paperwork onto that number. And on days when the legitimate loads do not naturally produce the required number, a load against contract 8841C appears. The load is weighed. The load is recorded. The bins become heavier for it. The paperwork agrees. The system remains good. The grain is real. That is what keeps pulling me back from simpler explanations. I have walked the bins. The canola in bin 3 has the weight the sheet says it has. It is not a phantom total in a computer. It is not a clerical error. It is not a malfunctioning printer repeating a line it should not repeat. Matter came in. Matter entered the system. Matter was assigned a contract number belonging to a dead farmer, and I signed for it. On Friday, I looked at Bob Hansen's gatehouse log. Bob has kept the gate at the Caribert elevator since the 80s. He is older than he admits, thin as baling wire, with a winter cap he wears even indoors. Bob records every vehicle that comes through the gate. Trucks, fuel deliveries, inspectors, maintenance contractors, managers' wives dropping off lunches, everyone. His log for October 22 records 73 trucks in and out. 73, not 74. No brown Ford half-ton at 0914. No brown Ford half-ton at 1622. No brown Ford at any time. I went to Bob and asked him if he had seen, on Tuesday, a brown Ford half-ton with mud on the plate. Bob said no. Bob said he would have logged it. Bob said he had been on the gate all day except for 10 minutes at noon when he went to the washroom in the staff trailer. I asked him what time. He told me 12:05 to 12:15. The Ford came at 09:14 and 16:22. The 10-minute absence does not explain anything, but it is still a gap. The 3 minutes after 09:14 are a gap. The clock disagreement at 13:47 is a gap. The 3 minutes between my leaving and Daryl countersigning are a gap. I notice the gaps now. I did not notice them then. I think the gaps are arranged. I think they have always been arranged. I am going to say one more thing about Hugh, because Hugh is the person I have been thinking about most. Hugh trained me for 2 weeks in September of 2011. On the last day of my training, before the rush had properly started, he sat with me in the scale house and drank coffee. The yard was quiet. There was one truck due later that afternoon and nothing else. The grain dust had not yet worked its way into every seam of my coat. The terminal hummed. The out-of-date calendar was not yet out of date. Hugh told me about the job. He told me about drivers who would try to argue moisture. He told me about farmers who always forgot field numbers. He told me which contracts to double-check because the producers had similar names. He told me where to stand in winter, so the draft from the steel door did not hit the back of my neck. He told me about the manager who had hired him in 1986, a hard man with a kind streak. He told me about Duerksen, whom he had worked under for a single season before Duerksen retired. He said Duerksen was quiet, exact, a man who never made an error in the ledger. Then Hugh told me what Duerksen had told him on the day he handed over the keys. The job is simple, Hugh said, but there's one thing you have to learn. I remember him tapping ash from a cigarette he was not supposed to be smoking in the scale house. I remember the open window. I remember the yard empty and bright. The bins know their own number, Hugh said. The weighmaster's job is to make the paper agree with the bins. I took this, in 2011, as old-timer wisdom. Trust the sensors. Check the math. Do not overthink the paperwork. For 14 years, I treated it as a saying. I think it was an instruction. I think Duerksen gave Hugh an instruction. I think Hugh gave me an instruction. I think I have been carrying it out. I think when Hugh opened the bottom drawer and showed me the wooden card index, he was not showing me an old-fashioned accounting tool. He was handing me the mechanism by which the instruction is carried out. The brown Ford is the form the mechanism takes when the bins require matter the day has not provided. I do not know where the canola comes from. I do not know how 23,980 kilograms of grain entered Pit 3 Tuesday between 09:14 and 09:19 without a logged truck, a readable plate, or a driver anyone remembers seeing. I know it is in the bin. I know I weighed it. I know I recorded it. I know I signed for it. And I know the signature was made at a moment between 1811 and 1839 that I did not experience. I want to be honest about something else. Since Tuesday, I have found myself doing small things before realizing I am doing them. On Wednesday morning, as I already said, I opened the wooden card index without conscious decision. My hand went to the drawer before my coat was off. I was holding the 8841C card before I understood I had pulled it. On Thursday afternoon, after speaking with the manager, I returned to the scale house and walked to the contract board. There was a blank card in my hand. I had written 8841C on it. Under the contract number, I had written October 24th. There was no delivery scheduled for October 24th. There was no ticket. There was no call from the manager. There was no reason to pin that card. I pinned it anyway. It has been on the board since. I have not removed it. I want to be the kind of person who would have removed it immediately. I want to be able to say that once I realized what I had done, I took it down, tore it in half, and threw it away. I am not that person. Apparently, I am the kind of person who pins it. I tried to test myself Saturday. I drove to the elevator in the afternoon. When no one else was there, I unlocked the scale house. I stood in front of the board and looked at the card. 8841C. October 24th. I told myself to remove it. I reached up. My hand stopped an inch from the card. There was no force holding me. No invisible pressure. No voice. No pain. Nothing dramatic enough to make a story sound like a story. My hand simply stopped, and the feeling returned. Kitchen. Reason forgotten. Original decision trusted. I stood like that for nearly a minute. Then I lowered my hand and locked the scale house and went home. The card is still there. I am writing this account on Sunday evening, at the desk in the scale house. The wall clock says 1914. The terminal says 1914. They agree. The card for 8841C is in my peripheral vision. The elevator is closed on Sundays. Bob is not on shift. There are no scheduled deliveries. The manager is at home in Wilkie. His key set is in his house. I have the only other key to the scale house and the inbound gate. I came here intending to remove the card. Instead, I sat down and began writing. That is not entirely true. I came here intending to remove the card, and then I thought I should leave a record first, and then the record became the reason I was here. And now I do not know which intention was mine and which intention was provided to me by the work. The yard outside is quiet. The elevator legs are dark, except for the security light above the pit. The bins make settling noises in the cold. If you have never stood near full-grain bins at night, you may not know that they are never truly silent. Metal contracts, grain shifts. Something inside the mass resettles itself with a soft, dry pressure, like a held breath moving from one lung to the other. The air smells of diesel and crushed canola. I am going to set this account aside in a moment, because the gate has just opened. I heard it clearly. Metal moving against metal. The inbound gate. Bob is not here. No delivery is scheduled. No one should have opened it. I am going to walk to the window in a moment and look at the inbound scale. I am not going to describe what I see if it is the brown Ford. I am going to describe what I do. What I do is this. I sit down at the desk. I switch on the terminal. The terminal warms with its small electrical hum, and the LED display lights red. I open the wooden card index. I pull the card for contract 8841C. I lay it on the green linoleum top of the desk. I take my pencil. I open a fresh page of triplicate paper from the box under the desk and feed it into the printer. I set the gross button under my index finger. I notice, with the part of me that is writing this, that my hand is steady. I notice my breathing is steady. I notice the feeling has returned, not suddenly but completely, as if it has been waiting just behind the work all this time. The kitchen feeling, the reason forgotten, the original decision trusted. I notice that I am about to press the green button. I notice that the wall clock reads 1918. The terminal reads 1918. They agree. I notice that the printer is ready. I notice that the card is on the desk. I notice that the pencil is in my hand. I am noticing all of this in real time. And I want anyone who reads this to understand something very important. Noticing is not the same as stopping. I have been noticing, in some manner, for 14 years. The noticing has never been the stopping. I do not know whether it can become the stopping. I would like to think it can. I am going to put the pencil down now. I am going to leave this account on the desk. I am going to walk out to the inbound scale and look at whatever is on it. Then I am going to walk back into the scale house. I am going to either weigh the load, or I am not going to weigh the load. Whichever one I do, the bin sensors will produce a number at the end of the night. The number will be what the number is, and someone will sign for it. I would like the person who reads this to know that if there is a sheet for tonight, and if it is signed, the signature will be mine. I would like that person to know, also, that I cannot fully promise the signature will be made by the part of me that is writing this sentence. I want to promise it. I am going to try. The gate is open. The yard light is coming through the window, in the long, flat way. It comes in October, on a clear evening. The air smells of diesel, and crushed canola. Somewhere in the bins there is a tonnage that knows what number it intends to be. The number is not yet reached. The day is not yet done. I am putting the pencil down. I am standing up. The wall clock says 1921. The terminal says 1921. They agree. I am going to the window now.